Hi, everyone. It's Barb Egan with Therapy Talks. And before we jump into today's episode, I want to take a moment to tell you about an incredible gift from Switch Research. You can click on the link in the description of this episode to gain a free lifetime access to the Self-Love Masterclass. And in this, you get access to introspective journaling prompts that accompany those daily lessons and over 20 hours of guided journaling sessions by a licensed therapist. Plus, you get a digital version of the self-love journal to use in conjunction with the video series. So don't forget to claim your free gifts today. All right. And on today's episode, it's a great one. We have on Dr. Ty Alonso, a clinical psychologist from New Jersey, and we talk all things parenting, kids, teens, what she is seeing in her therapy practice, and what it looks like in an anxious world for parents, for kids, for teens. And she gives some practical strategies of accompanying that and fostering that deep connection. So I hope you join me on it today. As a mental health professional, I love this topic. I love working with kids and families and parents, but also as a mom, and we have 7 kids between us. So we have a really great episode for you today. Thank you. So, Ty, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And so tell us a little bit about you before we dive into your work. Who are you? What are parts of your story?
Sure. So I am a licensed clinical psychologist and a mom to 3 kids. I have a private practice in New Jersey. I'm licensed in New York, and I'm a member of PsyPact. So I can work with people who live in 40 different US states. I specialize in mood disorders and relationships, specifically family relationships. I'm not a couples counselor. And I have a background as a forensic psychologist. So for almost 10 years, I worked with families that were involved with child protective services. Yeah, and then I started a private practice simultaneously. And as of the past year, I've really focused just on private practice.
Okay. For our listeners, what does that all mean?
Yes. So that's a great question because oftentimes when I say that I was a forensic psychologist, that can be a really confusing thing. People might think of like Hannibal Lecter, and that is not what I did. My section of forensic psychology was more the intersection of families and child welfare and the law. So, families that needed some extra support and that there was a crisis in the family. Maybe there was some difficulties with parenting. Maybe there was a child that had a lot of needs, adoption, fostering, a lot of trauma, a lot of domestic violence. I'm also bilingual. I speak Spanish. So a lot of the cases were like immigration cases. Um, so there was a lot of variety, but it was always focused on family and on helping support families as much as we could to protect children.
I'm so excited to have you on of just talking about families and kids and just the therapy world, the climate of our world right now. And I'm a mom of 4, so I am super excited to have you on today.
Wow, I love that. Oh, that's so then you know how it goes and you know how hard parenting can be.
Yeah. So right now in your private practice, how long have you been in that? You said kind of in the last year. Did you transition solely into that?
Yeah, so I physically moved my practice last May. So it's been a little bit over a year that I've been doing this. But prior to that, I did see some of the same clients at a different location, but I've been here for a year.
Okay. And what kind of propelled you for that switch of what you're sharing of forensic psychology, a lot of trauma, deep, meaningful work, but that's hard. And then to that switch to private practice. What was that like for you?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you asked that because I think it's such a big transition for therapists who are so used to always being under supervision and working with others to go off on your own. For me, I think I found, you know, confidence and a real interest in working with this population. I felt confident enough because I was able to start seeing clients even while I was at the other practice. It was something that my previous bosses and I sort of worked out. And so I felt like I wasn't starting from zero. I had some people that I could bring with me. Also, being a mom of three kids was really another reason for that. So the schedule was something that I needed to work out. And after being a student and a trainee and a supervisee for so many years and working so many hours, like I needed to rework that a little bit. And private practice really gave me that opportunity.
Oh, it's amazing. I love it.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so in your private practice, what do you love to work in? Who do you love to work with?
It's so funny. I get asked this question, and I feel like so many people have such a very, very specific niche, and that is not the case for me. I mean, it is in that it always kind of boils down to family and to really creating a space where people can feel that it's okay to be authentic and to be accepted for who they really are. And to sort of build the courage to bring that into relationship with like their parents or maybe a sibling or whomever it might be. But I have worked with kids, I have worked with teens, I have worked with adults on inpatient units, outpatient units. I've gone into prisons. I've worked in like very fancy private practice on Park Avenue, and I've worked in community mental health in Queens. So I've been all over the place. But I think what that has really taught me is regardless of where we are and what the struggles are, there's still like this common theme of wanting to be like known and wanting to be accepted and wanting to belong that everybody has.
Everybody,
Hmm.
regardless of culture, socioeconomic status, totally. That belonging. Yeah.
Yeah. And we go about it in such different ways and in the best ways that we know how. And sometimes we get in our own way. And I think that that's when therapy sort of comes into play to kind of help people get a little bit closer to what they want, because there's a lot of fear associated with that as well.
Especially around kids, I would say, like for parents of, it's one thing for a parent to go, or an adult to go to therapy, and that's getting more trendy, or mental health. But I could imagine, and I don't know if you're seeing this, but with kids, like a parent saying, "Oh, I don't want my kid to go to therapy. No, it's not that bad." Do you see
Mhm.
that?
Absolutely. Yeah, it brings up so much. So parenting in and of itself, therapy aside, stirs so many things up from us, like brings up our own child rearing, like so many memories, so many things we thought we had laid to rest. And then the idea of bringing them into therapy, I think for a lot of parents brings up this notion that have I failed my child somehow? Have I not done enough? Is this a reflection of me and my like not good enoughness? Mhm. And and I definitely don't see it that way. I see therapy as a tool and a support, not just for the child, but also for the parent, because sometimes in our lives things are really hard, but there's a lot of stigma that's still associated with that, with mothering, with all of it. And so I understand, and working with parents is a delicate thing.
So when someone comes to see you, could you give an example of like your average person that might come in to see you and what that journey with you would look like?
Of course. So I would say that a lot of times when kids come to see me, it's because the parent has made the decision that they should be in therapy. And so for some of those kids, they've also agreed. Some of those kids feel like they don't have any choice but to agree. And some of them come in sort of kicking and screaming and refusing to be part of it in any way. And so sometimes what I hear from parents is things like, I'm at my wit's end. I don't know what else to do. Like I'm desperate. Like tell me what to do, fix my kid. Like I may hear things like that. So I think the first session for me is always kind of giving them enough space to sort of air out what's going on, but together. I don't want to meet with them separately. I usually have a phone consult in advance to give parents a chance to tell me what's going on. But I want to begin therapy with kids and parents knowing that we're sort of in this together. And in doing so, we're meeting jointly. So that first session spends a lot of time sort of checking in with the child and the parent. Well, what do you think about what mom said? What do you think about what he said or what she said, what they said? Um, and then talking about confidentiality, because that is a big thing with the kids,
Right.
right? Are you here to report back to my parent and tell them the things that I don't want them to know? Right? Are you on my side or are you on their side? Or you're practically my mom's age, so you're just another like grown up. And I'm a kid in a world of grown-ups. And so it takes a lot of time for a kid to feel like even though they are working with the grown up, this is a space where they do have agency. And so I see kids, in particular, kids from like much stricter households, really wanting to please and putting themselves aside, and then having to work with them on how to bring up what it is that they need in the therapy. But I also tell parents and kids that my goal ultimately is to bridge this communication between them so parents don't have to feel anxious about what's happening in the therapy room that I don't know about, because eventually the hope is that this child will talk to them about it. And then because of that, improvement in their relationship, they will need me less.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Before maybe I ask some questions about that part, the confidentiality piece for our listeners hearing in, could you kind of give an overview of confidentiality in therapy in general, but then narrow in the microscope down to kids or teens and parents? Because this is a big one in this demographic.
Absolutely. Yeah, it absolutely is. So, generally speaking, there are three situations in which we would have to break confidentiality as legal as mandated reporters, right? It is the law that we have to report any situation in which a child or an adult says that they're at risk of hurting themselves. So we do a risk assessment, we ask a series of questions, and we determine, is there an imminent risk of harm that this person is going to seriously harm themselves. Then the second one is, if the person has told us that they are going to harm someone else, then we have a duty to warn that this is going to happen. And then the third one is, if we know of any child abuse or elder abuse or neglect that's going on, that's been reported by the client, whether they're a child or they're an adult. So those are the three situations. And I guess a fourth one would be if somehow the case becomes court involved and we receive a court order to release records or to testify.
So say the average person may be coming in to see you with their child or their teen, what would that confidentiality piece look like in working with you or in general in therapy?
I usually tell parents with the children or the teens in the room, the only way that this works is if your child trusts me. And the only way they're going to trust me is if we have some confidentiality with what we talk about. So I will absolutely tell mom, tell dad, tell whomever is their guardian, if I think that you are in danger of hurting yourself, hurting someone else, or someone else is hurting you or another child in the home. Those are the situations in which I have to say in order to keep you safe. But if that happens, I will talk to you about it. It will not be a surprise. Do you have any questions about what counts and what doesn't count? And kids usually say no. And then in private, I'll give them another opportunity, because maybe sometimes they feel a little uneasy saying, well, if I smoked, will you tell my mom? If I, drank at a party, will you tell my dad?
Oh, that's so good. I love that you said that. In order for this to really work, they have to trust you. And in order for trust to be established, there has to be some of those boundaries of confidentiality. So it's really in place so that they get the most out of their experience of therapy and have that it's built on trust.
Absolutely. I mean, imagine that you worked for a corporation or you worked in some place with lots of employees and something happened and you went to HR, but every time you went to HR, they told everybody else in the company what you said. Would you ever take your problems to HR?
No,
Never.
that's a good analogy.
hmm
Okay, so when parents or kids they come to see you, most often you'll do the consultation, kind of talk with parents, get a lowdown of what's going on. And then that first session, you work with them together.
hmm
And
Yes.
then will you ever do individual sessions like with the kid or teen and with the parent separately, or do you work together? What does that look like?
Yeah. So I think it's on a case by case basis. There's certainly situations in which I work primarily with the child and we have some check-ins with the parent to catch them up on what's been going on and what are some of the skills that we've been working on so the parent can support their kid with that at home. And then there are certain cases in which it becomes more necessary to alternate between individual and family. So maybe with one case, I might do 3 individual sessions with a child, but then have a monthly session that's a family session. And with other families, maybe we're alternating the sessions because I'm noticing that there's something happening between the members of that family that is in some way contributing to what's happening with the child.
What would an example of that be?
Yeah. So one example of that might be a situation in which perhaps there's some marital conflict, but it gets played out in the parenting of the children, and so it creates a great deal of stress for that child, and so the child develops maybe some symptoms that then make the parent feel that the child needs to come to therapy. But when working together, I can see that there's something more going on. And I sort of see family work as like everything is connected, right? It's a system. And if you pull on one end, everything gets pulled in that direction. And if you pull from the other end, and so if you're pulling from both ends, then there's a great deal of tension within that system. And so if there's marital conflict, if there's a child that has a chronic illness or has a disability, right? And now we're seeing the sibling of that child because they're having anger problems, because they're having a lot of anxiety or depression, right? I want to really understand, well, how is the family approaching this child's disability, right? And what do we know about the sibling's experience of having a sibling that has a disability and requires so many resources and so much attention from the family?
Yes. And you said system. Do you take a systemic approach? What are usually your approaches that you go to your modalities for therapy work?
Yeah, so if I'm working with kids and I'm integrating family work, then I'm thinking about family systems, and I'm thinking about attachment theory as well. So one question that I love to ask kids when I meet with them is, who's the boss in the family? Who's the vice president, and what are the roles of the other people? And kids come up with all sorts of like roles for the members of the family. I mean, I have kids say things like, well, this one is God, this other one is, some other religious figure, and I'm the attorney in the family. And then I might say, well, what does the attorney do? Who do you defend? And so then we talk about it that way. And sometimes parents sit back and they're like, wow, they're absolutely right. I just never thought about it that way, that this is the attorney of the family.
Oh, I love that. So who's the boss? Who's the vice principal?
Hmm. Yeah, and we'll talk about it like in terms of like school systems, or if it's a religious family, like religious systems, or maybe even a TV show that they love, they might assign different characters to the members of the family.
Oh, I love that. That is so insightful. And you're meeting that child, especially where they're at in their language and creative thinking to put that symbolic of what's going on. Sometimes that's a lot easier to do or creative thinking than just tell me what's going on in your family. Most kids are not going to answer that type of question.
Yeah, usually it depends on the kid, but usually with that type of question, I get really big eyes. And then there's a fearfulness about, well, what if I answer wrong? What if I say the thing that I'm not supposed to say? Um, or someone is somehow upset. So I like approaching this creatively because I think when we can distance it a little bit, right, attribute it to a character rather than your mom, it feels safer for kids
Mm,
and for
so good.
parents.
Right. So good to even hear that. Yeah. And it can kind of put it into place without so personally attacked as a parent. Because as parents, we have to do a lot of our own work too.
Yeah, but it can be really difficult to receive that information as a parent because I think a lot of parents come and they bring their child to therapy and they're already feeling, sometimes down on themselves. So to then hear that from their child can also make them feel even worse. And what I don't want therapy to become is a thing that parents dread coming to, because then that really raises the risk that they won't want to continue. So I do try to do something late at the end when I'm working with family. So I have like some family games, some things that like sort of inject a little bit of playfulness into it, because I think one, we can end on a brighter note. Two, it gives us an opportunity to kind of, you know, practice building up this relationship. And it gives us an opportunity for me to model some of those things. And for parents who really don't know how to approach their child about a specific topic, do that in a way that works for their child.
Oh, I love that. Because yeah, you could have a really heavy session or the doorknob turners, like it gets really heavy right at the end. And then you're kind of left with this weightiness on you that you have for the next week or the next month until they see you again. I love that lightness. And like you said, you're modeling tools for them. So they get to take that in between sessions and really incorporate that to their real life and their real relationship. What are some of the things you like to do?
So I think that what I hear a lot from parents, or what I see a lot, especially when in the room together with the kids, is this tendency to try to kind of explain away why the child isn't feeling a certain way. So a child might say something like, I just really hate piano lessons and I don't want to do them. Well, you're so good at it. Well, it makes me feel really sad. No, you're not sad. Remember that time that you played and you were laughing and you were smiling and you really loved it. And I think that sometimes parents, and I can certainly relate to this, feel threatened when faced with a child having a negative emotion or having a hard time. Like, we see our place as sort of saving our kid from that feeling. And I think it makes us feel anxious. And as a way of sort of dealing with our own anxiety, we just kind of like push it aside. But what that often does is it leaves a kid feeling dismissed and misunderstood. So we feel better about it because we don't have to hear it anymore, but it's not breeding connection, and it's creating distance. So I try to help parents sort of see this as an opportunity. I'm like, I know it's hard. I know it brings up stuff for you. I know that the piano is important to you, mom. But right now, they're not saying they want to quit. They're just saying it's hard and that they're not really loving it right now. Can we just sort of sit with that for a second? You don't have to fix it. What they need for you is to sort of just like sit there with them for a moment. And we explore how uncomfortable that is. But kids really appreciate that.
You're right. Like you said, connection before correction or fixing is so important. And just feeling dismissed. Do you think that kid is going to bring something else that's tough or bothering them that they're worried about to a parent who's just dismissing, like you said, based on their own anxiety? Oh, my kid's feeling a negative emotion. That makes me anxious. So I'm going to try to just smooth it over, or, oh no, re-justify it. But what happens is there's this massive disconnection. There's a dismissiveness and nothing really gets altered. So I love that you're giving words and you're sitting in the uncomfortable together, because life is not rainbows and butterflies whatsoever. There's a lot of discomfort, and more often for parents, our own anxiety comes up. We want to fix. But in order to learn that we can tolerate stress, we have to be able to be in stressful situations to some extent in that window and talk about it, feel connected in it too. So, oh, I love that.
hmm And it can happen a lot in families too, where they have a really emotional moment. Like, it's a family that's always really well put together, but something happened over the weekend, and now there's big emotions in the room. And they might encourage me to, all right, well, we're gonna leave you talk to them about it. Or, okay, let's move on. And I'll say, no, let's pause for a second. You seem really upset, mom. What's it like for you, dad, to see mom this way? What's it like for you, son or daughter? And sort of model for them how to sort of navigate the situation, because it is a really uncomfortable situation. But just because we move on doesn't mean that things are resolved. They sort of transform, and then they come up in other ways where people are sort of being short with each other, and there's tension, unnamed tension.
Oh, I love that of, oh, ask, not just asking mom, what's going on with you? Where are you feeling it in your body? But asking and inviting the rest of the family, because it's very systemic. Dad, what's it like to see mom this way? Son, daughter, what's it like to see mom this way? I bet there's a lot there that happens in that room there.
There is. And I mean, even if you and I reflect for a moment what it's like to have relationships with other therapists, right? Our friends, our colleagues, the unique thing about that relationship, or maybe even with our own therapist, is that we get feedback about how we are received, which is something that a lot of people maybe don't get. So in this family, maybe mom doesn't understand what impact this is having on the others, and vice versa. The other individual, the child, doesn't understand the impact of their behavior on the sibling and the rest of the family. And so this is really a unique opportunity to explore that openly.
Ah, oh, wow. I love that. And you mentioned attachment work. You love to use an attachment lens. For our listeners who maybe have heard of that or don't really know what that is, can you describe that?
Yeah, it's essentially the kind of security that you have in your connection with someone else, your emotional connection. So we have lots of different attachments with people. Some of them are more central. So we might think of the people that we're closest to, we have like the strongest bond with them. And then maybe we have acquaintances that we have bonds with, but they're not quite as strong or as close as our parents or our best friend or our spouses. And so when I'm working with kids, you'll see kids that are well into their teens and the parents see them as these like, grown-ups. And it's true, they are much more grown up than their 8-year-old siblings or, the next client that's, 10 years old. But that person is still a kid who very much wants a relationship with their parent. And I think sometimes that can be really underestimated, especially during adolescence when kids are individuating and separating from parents. Like they're pushing their parents away. Parents are often feeling rejected and unwanted. But that's a very normal developmental thing that happens with kids when they're teenagers and they still want that connection with their parents. So, what I want for all of my clients, and I have more ability to help them with when I'm working with them together, like with a family, is to help strengthen that relationship, the attachment that they have to each other. But that involves giving up control in exchange for attunement, right? And understanding. It involves, listening without dismissing and really trying to kind of enter each other's world, which is a difficult thing because we have two people with their own history of stuff and that stuff is it's sort of crashing into each other.
What are some practical tools that you would say could help foster more secure connection or secure attachment, especially between a parent and a child or a teen?
Yeah, so I mean, the strategies would generally be the same across the childhood lifespan, but the way that we would do them would be different, right? So like with a very young child it might be in play, whereas with a teen it might be through conversation. But I would say definitely join them in an activity that is of interest to them. I think a lot of times as parents we're looking to have our kids join us in something that we love, and that's amazing. I love it when my kids love to do what I love, but that requires them to always meet me where I'm at and not for me to meet them where they're at. So eventually there will be some back and forth. But if you really are looking to build attachment, I would spend some time doing with them something that they love. Let them teach you about it, let them tell you about it. Like, be really interested in what they like about it, how it makes them feel. I would say with multiples, as you know, it's really hard to carve out one on one time. That can be very challenging. But if it's at all possible, even for just like 10 or 15 minutes to do a check in, I find bedtime is a great time, especially for like the younger kids, because they don't want to separate. They want to stay up as late as possible. So that's a good time if you have a kid who doesn't really want to talk during the day, or you ask them how their day was and they say, it was fine. It was good. I did nothing. They're more likely to tell you at bedtime.
Mhm. Oh, yeah, I second that. My son will give the best heart to hearts right at bedtime. And it's so, I mean, on one hand, I know some people who are like, no, they have to go to bed and have those strict boundaries, but I'm more in the middle. And definitely, if he's willing to share his heart with me, I just eat that up. I love that. And entering into their world of play, it is such a difference on the days where I'm busy or frantic or my own stuff. I'm like, oh, we have to do this or get the laundry done. And to the days where I'm like, okay, put that aside. Even if it's 10 minutes, I enter into their world to play. They are a different kid the rest of the day. Their cup is full, and I just see it so much. It's such a good reminder for me, too.
I absolutely agree. I feel like their behavior is often different on the days where their cup is filled, just like you said, than on the days where that doesn't happen. And I mean, some parents really don't like to play. It's very hard for them. And I say, you know, set a timer. Set a timer. And for that time, put your phone away and give them your attention. You know, it's going to be over. The timer is going to tell you when it's going to end. And they will have had time that's just between them and you.
Mhm.
5, 10 minutes.
Oh, I love that. These are such great tips that you're sharing with us. And what are you seeing, I guess, in our culture right now? I'm American. We just got back from Nashville, got to work with some great family therapists there, like Sissy Goff's book coming out, The Worry-Free Parent, about, doing your own work in order to show up for your kids, primarily seeing that rise of anxiety in kids and teens. And then in Canada, I mean, our landscape is very similar. Kids are more anxious, they're more depressed, families, I would say adults too. What are you seeing right now? What does the landscape look like? What is kind of that you're seeing in therapy or in general in our culture?
Okay, that is a great question, and I want to answer
The big
it.
one.
I want to add one more thing to what we were talking about before, and this was a well, it was something that I knew, but I really experienced with my 4-year-old. We were having a tough time, and I was saying something like, "Well, I love you, mommy. You can be mad, but mommy still loves you." And he said to me, "But do you like me? Do you like me when you're mad?" And I thought about that, right? I thought about how sometimes it's so hard to really enjoy our children when we're having a hard time, but how much they know and they can pick up on that. Even this little person at 4, and that's because he has words. Who knows how long he's been able to pick up on that. And so I spent a lot of time saying to him thereafter, I love you and I like you. I love you and I like you. And I felt like for him that was really important. But I think it's a message that's important for other parents too. Your kids want to be loved and they want to be liked.
Oh, so true. Yes, because they might know that, whether it's head knowledge or it's integrated, and they know, okay, mom and dad love me. You look at like the elementary gifts that they bring home of, my mom is the best because she loves me, or my dad is the best because he loves me or plays with me. Like that's their language. But the piece about like, and we think about it in families or in relationships, like I know I'm loved, but do I feel liked too? Do I feel delighted in? And that's huge. That can be a big shift. And again, that attachment piece is huge. I love that word too. Like, I love you and I like you.
Yes. I love that. But sorry, I derailed us. We can go back to the other question about the landscape.
Oh yeah, yeah. But I just love that. Well, how old are your kids?
They are 4, 7, and 9, soon to be 5, 8, and 9.
Oh, such fun ages. So mine are similar. My son is almost 7, daughter 5, son 3.5, and baby 10 months. So definitely love that. The ages and stages of development and attachment and child development. And yeah.
Yeah, very sweet, very sweet. And eventually they'll come together where the developmental ages are development is closer and they'll be able to engage in more things together and then that becomes more fun too.
Ah, yes. Oh, I love it. So the therapy landscape that you're seeing between kids and adults, parents in our culture right now, it's a heightened age of anxiety or depression, social media. What does that look like to you? What are you noticing and seeing?
I'm definitely seeing a lot of anxiety. I'm seeing a lot of distancing. So whether it's, spouses are distanced from each other and spending more time with the kids or being harder on the kids are feeling distanced from others as well. There's more engagement with social media. So there's more access to both positive and then also not so positive experiences. I think that kids now have experience in a whole other world that maybe you and I didn't have growing up. And as parents, we're sort of learning how to deal with this. I think I hear a lot from parents, and this isn't new. Things like, well, when I was a kid, I had it so much worse. When I was a kid, I was happy for what I had. I was grateful for what I had. And especially when working with families that have immigrated and have worked really, really hard to provide their kids with new opportunities, or even the parents maybe are a child of immigrants, this idea of being grateful and you're ungrateful comes up a lot. So there's a lot of shame and a lot of guilt in the family for um, having any need that's experienced as being too much or going beyond what is it grateful versus not.
Yes. When you're saying parents being permissive or overly harsh, what does that look like? And then I wonder what is kind of the happy medium? What would that look like for us to try and look forward to or emulate?
That's a great question. And I think every kid is different, right? You know firsthand that they have their own temperaments. There are children that just sort of roll with the punches, and there are kids who, it's much harder for them
I
to do
have the
that.
strong-willed ones. Yeah.
Yes, my youngest is the most strong-willed of all my children, and it was sort of a surprise. I thought to myself, "What's happening here?" The first 2 were so easygoing, and then you realize they're different people. We have to adjust our approach, but, that being said, I would say overly permissive might be things like, there's conflict between siblings, and siblings are getting hurt, and there's nobody stepping up to protect the child from the other child, or there's problems at school and nobody is addressing it. So things are going unaddressed. Kids are being under supervised. I would say that that's more on the permissive end. And in terms of harshness, I think obviously insults, right? Sort of equating someone's inability to do something with being worthless or not being good would be harsh. Um, Maybe having expectations that are beyond what that child is developmentally capable of doing, also harsh. And then somewhere in the middle would be being attuned to what is it that your child is actually able to do, giving them space to kind of develop that sense of I'm able to do difficult things with support as needed. But I also have room to grow. And I also have enough supervision and oversight that I am safe and that I am doing things that are appropriate for my age.
That's good. And then where would you say is the healthy medium or on one of the spectrum? What does healthy look like?
I would say for me, ideally, it would be a relationship in which there is respect for each other, but there is also an ability to communicate how people feel about things, right? So we can communicate our feelings without being disrespectful. And as parents, we can hear it without feeling disrespected. I mean, obviously, it's one thing if your child is communicating their feelings in an angry way and insulting the parents with, terrible names. But then the goal would be to say, well, I feel really upset that you took my phone away. I feel that that's an unfair punishment. And then maybe the parent would say, well, let's talk about it. Right. And then ultimately the parent makes that decision. Well, I understand that you think that it's unfair, but we talked about it in advance. If this happened, your phone would be taken away. And that's what we're going to do. And even with my own kids, sometimes I might say something like tablet time is over in 5 minutes. We got to eat dinner. And I give them a lot of reminders. And then when tablet time is over, inevitably there is whining and there is crying. And no, but I'm in the middle of this game. Well, how much time do you think you need to finish? I think I just need another minute. So if I give you another minute, then you'll turn it off and we'll have dinner. Yes. Well, that seems reasonable. I'll give you another minute. Or they might say, I need another hour. Well, that's really unreasonable. No, you have to turn it off and continue after. And I think what that does is, what does it cost me to give them another minute? Not a lot, right? And what we've done is now created a relationship or an opportunity for the child to sort of, assert themselves in an appropriate way, feel listened to, and sort of decrease the conflict between us so that I can still get them to do what I need them to do.
Right. Oh, I love that. I was just reading in a book about the appeal. And that's kind of what the author is describing, specifically with teens, but I think it's so applicable with younger kids as well. But it's that power dynamic, that need for, or that want for control. And I think for parents, it's, I said now's the time. I don't care if it's 1 minute, it's done now. And that's like that spirit of control or fear, and really getting away from that perfectionism or that control power piece and getting that connection. And when you can have an appeal of here's the rule, and you did a great job in that example too of saying the boundary. Okay, 5 more minutes and reminders. Hey, and then we're going to eat dinner. And then coming back and saying, okay, well, that boundary is there, but we're going to appeal. Oh, you only need 1 more minute. You could be a control freak parent, which again, some of us get that way when we're threatened or fearful or anxiety, our own stuff. And then, no, I said now. And then there's just a lot of tension. It can blow up over something. But that appeal invites their perspective in. Oh, 1 more minute. Oh, yeah, that's reasonable. That shows, hey, I respect you. I trust you. I'm inviting you into this dialogue and process together. We're on the same team. And really, it gives a little bit of power in a safe place to that child to feel heard, which then probably is going to help them respect you more too in those boundaries. So I love that example. That was really helpful to notice the reasonable versus unreasonable too boundary or those requests.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately having that flexibility as a parent makes things easier for us and us getting things done with our kids. Sometimes we think, well, it'll be faster if I say, well, I said no, and then they just stop. But sometimes that just brings up so much stuff that it's really not that much easier for us. And so I always say to parents, I'm looking to make your relationship better and your life easier as a parent. Like, I'm not trying to give you all of these new things to try so that you feel overwhelmed. And you certainly don't have to do this every single time, but infusing some of it into some of your interactions might be helpful. And I also see this as a way of preparing us for those teen conversations that are more uncomfortable. Like, I'm laying the groundwork here so that my kids feel like we can have conversations about difficult things. Those difficult things now consist of tablet time and how much dessert I can have. But later on, it's going to be different topics, but the feeling is going to be the same. I feel heard. I feel like I can go to my parent. My parent is reasonable.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. That does. It so equates and reverberates throughout those years and development stages too.
Mhm.
What do you think is contributing to the rise of anxiety that you're seeing?
My gosh, it's so hard to say. I mean, I think parents, sometimes we have our own stuff that's going on that largely goes unaddressed because of a lot of shame, right? I think we are a generation that is sort of becoming more in touch with our own feelings and the stuff that has happened for us. I think with kids, sometimes these kids are really overstressed and overworked. And there isn't enough balance between the things that they have to do and how they feel. And so, yeah, sometimes it's hard being a kid and you have to do your homework and you have to go to school. There's things that you just have to do. Um, but I think I'm not quite sure exactly why. I do know that we have more discourse about it today than we did many, many years ago. So I don't know that there's more anxiety now than there was before. I just think we're hearing about it a lot more than we did.
Mhm. Yeah. What is your take on screen time and social media? That's a big thing that parents talk about, worry about, or again, are permissive about.
Yeah, I mean, screen time is a super effective tool at giving us a break, right? As parents, like, kids love screen time. There are so many options for the things that they can do there. And I think sometimes we can just sort of let them run with it, right? Because it allows us to get done what we have to get done. But I think that too much of it can also not be a good thing. One, because it takes away from like unstructured playtime, which is really important, especially for young kids in developing certain social skills and sort of working through things. Play is not just for fun, play is to help us develop motor skills and to help us develop social skills and to work through stuff in the play. Right. I'm worried about, my friends leaving me out. You'll see that come up in the play with some kids. And then for the older kids, I think that the kinds of interactions that we have on social media are so different than the ones we have face to face. And so, yeah, social media is wonderful because it does facilitate relationships, but it's a different kind of interaction than we have in person. Um, and also, sometimes there's access to things on social media that maybe are not appropriate for kids. I mean, I know even my youngest was playing some video games that his older sisters were playing. It was not appropriate for him. And so we had to cut it out. And for him specifically, it made a big difference in his behavior. But it requires a lot of monitoring. And if you have multiple kids, then you're monitoring different devices for different ages.
Yeah. I was part of, I'm not sure if you've heard of the film Screenagers that came out a few years ago. I was part of a mental health panel that spoke on it and what we were seeing the increase of screen time, whether it's gaming or social media, and the increase of anxiety, depression, low self esteem. And we were just talking about that. And I was on the panel speaking to that, to the mental health side of what happens to the brain or what we're seeing just those increases in kids. And so I think, again, they suggested a lot of the appeals or a social media contract, like working with your kid if they're older, they're teens specifically, of what is appropriate and working together in that. Some parents decide none, some decide too much or, more permissive, but really getting to that happy medium or of a contract working together of, okay, and if you do this, this, and this, then you get this amount of time. And it's not even just about the time, although that's an important factor. It's what is the message that I'm coming away with of, am I feeling worse or better after I'm off my device or my phone or scrolling? And for parents, we need to be mindful of how much we're on that. I think too, of, am I communicating that this phone, this thing right here, is more important than you right here and my connection with you? And so what I try to do is like put my phone on our kitchen counter, like up above when I come in, and I'm there. I'm trying to be wherever I am, be all there. And of course, you're going to have to do work or do things like that. And maybe you can step aside for your work time and have that time designated, but then being present with those kids, especially modeling that as parents.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, we hear a lot about the doom scroll too, right? Like seeing these quick videos on social media, and it activates a certain part of our brain. It keeps us happy, right? It keeps us from having to sort of deal with some of the more difficult things. And it can be in a lot of ways an avoidance or an escape.
Mhm.
And so what you do want for kids is for them to have those normal experiences of being a human being. Like sometimes life is hard and sometimes things are tough, and we have to work through it so that we're able to deal with it later on. And so I think sometimes too much of that social media can take away from those learning opportunities. But you're right, as parents, we totally, totally do the same thing sometimes, and we have to be aware of that.
And I think that's just the full circle of what you were saying of that attachment base, of that connection. Because if your kiddo has the language of what a feeling is or a feeling chart or to name their emotion, they have that safe rapport, that emotionally safe relationship with the parent, they can say, I'm feeling this. And they can and there's a dialogue, there's a connection, there's repairing, there's healing, there's a lot of growth that happens through that instead of the some things that we do for avoidance, let's say, instead. So really going back to that foundation, that presence, that attachment based approach.
And we were talking before how to join our kids and what they're interested in. Sometimes that could be what they're seeing on social media or a video game, and sitting with them and taking a look. My daughter the other day was telling me about this video she saw, and she was laughing hysterically. I did not understand what was funny, and I said, "Well, maybe we just need to watch it together." And I think the message to them there is, "Oh, you care about what I care about."
Right. Yeah. Let me enter into your world. Let me ask questions. And that can be true for social media or on a game or a TV show or a family movie night, and having even just one kind of reflection question to build that connection.
Yes, there's a really cool game we just discovered. It's called um, How Well Do You Know Your Family? I think it's
I
on
love
Amazon. And
that.
do you love it?
Oh
I
yeah, we're
love
all
it.
about like the family table talk cards and stuff here. And I was helping at my son's school, and one of the little girls in his class was like, "Oh yeah, that's our favorite game we play on Fridays." And I'm like, "I want to look into that. That's amazing."
It's so great because it has trivia cards, and the whole point of the game is to have the family members guess what the other person's answer is. So we're trying to get to know them better. And then there are these challenge cards that the kids think are absolutely hysterical, absolutely hysterical. So it's fun. Um, and I don't know, I thought it was great.
Oh, that's such a good takeaway. How well do you know your family? Oh, so Alonso, I know we're almost out of time, so I just want to again thank you for coming on today. Do you have any parting words of wisdom of, parents hearing this, kids, teens, whatever stage they're at, of just kind of words of encouragement? Like if you could take one thing today and lean into this week to develop that relationship with your child or teen, what would that be?
Hmm. Let's see. I want to give you the perfect answer. I don't know that I will, but I'll give you something. So, to parents, I will say, we hear so many things about what we should be doing. And I think it can be really discouraging to always feel like you're doing things not the way you're supposed to. But we're going to make mistakes. It's part of being a parent. Remember though, that you can always repair with your kids, and acknowledging that you've made a mistake and that maybe you don't really know or understand, but you want to, is such a powerful thing. Um, and that your kids, as hard or difficult they might be on some days, really also want a relationship with you. And I say that to the parents because sometimes we need to instill a little bit of hope. Times can get a little tough, but ultimately each of those people want to be closer to each other.
Oh, that's so good. Oh, well, again, thank you so much for coming on today. Not just as a mental health professional, do I so appreciate this and have learned a lot, but as a parent, I'm just so encouraged. Your tips and your insights have just been phenomenal. And I really appreciate you coming on and sharing that with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Oh, awesome.